welcome to Marriage University again. We're glad to have you back with us, and we're going to be speaking to you tonight on the issue of finances, how to effectively manage your money. And our goal is to get you into a fight before we end about, no, it's really not, about money. The scripture says in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10, whoever loves money never has money enough. Isn't that an interesting philosophy? If we're chasing money, we'll never have enough money. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. If we can get away from that focus, God says we can bring some satisfaction and contentment into who we are. The scripture also says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It's not evil by itself, but it's the root of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So that's why we need to bring our whole financial piece in our relationships into balance. So I want to begin to talk with you about budgeting tonight. How many of you live on a budget? Some of you live on a budget? Good. I want to talk to you about the principles of budgeting because it's necessary to tell our money where to go. If we don't tell our money where to go, then all we can do is look and see where it's been. So it's important to be able to tell it where to go, and there's some philosophies that I would suggest that you're going to have to develop around money. One little principle says that spendthrifts and tightwads marry each other. You always have one conservative person and you always have one person who wants to spend more, because the conservative person likes that looseness in the other one, and the person who is kind of the spendthrift likes the other one holding the reins. They don't like it a lot, but they like it enough just to bring some balance in the relationship. Now, where you really get into trouble is when you have two spendthrifts who marry each other, and they get in trouble very quickly because they're encouraging each other to go spend. They'll walk in a store and they'll say, we need new furniture. And the other one says, yeah, we do. Nobody's saying we don't have any money. It's drag out the credit card, we're going to redecorate the house. One says, I really would like to go to the Bahamas. The other one says, me too. Let's go. And so what are these philosophies that we need to look at? And the first philosophy that I need to say to you is hold your money together. If you're not holding your money together, you can easily be in trouble. See, the goal is to take his money and her money, bring them together, let it drop in one pot, and together you learn how to spend it. Now, sometimes the people who don't do that, the reason why they don't do it is because they fight about money, and so their way of compensating for their inability to manage conflict around money is to take it apart. Now, people say, well, it's easy for us. We split our money and it works for us. And I had a couple come in and tell me that one day, and I said, I guarantee you, I can put you into a fight by the time you leave this office. And they said, you can't? And I said, I can, and I did. They were screaming at each other by the time they left because he was angry at her because he was putting a lot of money into retirement and she wouldn't put any money into retirement. She was angry at him because she had to buy all the kids' clothes for school, and it was in September, and she was angry that he wouldn't contribute to that. And by the time they ended, they were really at odds with each other. And so I believe that you're single in a marriage if you don't take your money and put it together. One of the problems is I have people come in and they don't hold their money together, and I find them doing separate things. And I say to them, did you ever really get married? I know you have a piece of paper, but the issue is, did you really get married? Because holding your money separately says you're two single people in a marriage, and we can't have two single people in a marriage. And so it's important that we bring our money together and drop it in. The worst case I've ever seen is when a husband sold his wife a car. Now, that's about as bad as you can get. Another philosophy is around credit. There has to be a family philosophy around credit. You know, what will you do if you have $10 in your pocket and you go shopping for an anniversary present? What will you spend? $10. What will you spend if you have a credit card in your pocket? As much as you want. Oh, well, we'll pay for it later. Credit cards are supposed to be for emergencies most of the time. You ever notice that when you get a credit card, you have a multitude of emergencies? Everything's a crisis. You know, what do you do if your tires go bad on your car and you don't have much money? You go to a junkyard and buy new tires. If you have a credit card, you go buy brand new tires for your car. Credit cards can proliferate our whole way of life into going into a place where we don't have the money. I'll never forget when I was 19 years old. I worked as a circulation manager for a newspaper. And the head of the print shop, his name was James Mauser. Should have listened to James. James Mauser said to me, Larry, don't fall into the trap that everybody falls into around credit. Don't go get a bunch of credit cards. And I said, James, that's the American way of life. That's how you get things. You go buy things on credit, and then you make payments. I remember I borrowed $400 for furniture, and I thought, man, it was a national debt. It was then $400. I was making a whole $1.25 an hour. It took a long time to pay that back. In fact, I'll digress, but I remember sitting one day, and I had separated from my first wife. It's the time before we got a divorce, and I thought, if I'm going to have to sit in this house by myself, I'm going to have a vibrator recliner and a color television with a remote control. And I spent so much money on that that I paid $52 a month for the rest of my life to Montgomery Ward's. Thought I was never going to pay for it, and when I did, the remote didn't work, and the heat thing on the chair had quit working. So we have to have a philosophy about how we manage credit. Are we going to have credit cards, or aren't we? When Lori and I first met, she laid out 14 credit cards out on the table, and we cut all of those up but 2. And we still don't have a lot of credit cards, and we pay them off every month because we've determined that we're not going to get in the credit trap. And I would suggest to you that if you're carrying balances month to month, huge balances that you can't pay, you're in trouble and can get in trouble, stay in trouble really quickly.
But the problem with that is that when you cut up the credit cards, you've got to be sure and close the accounts. Because I was real tricky with all of that because we cut up the credit cards, but whenever I wanted to go buy something, I would just remember, I never really closed that account, and I would go and charge on the credit card. Again, I would just go up and get my number, and they'd give it to me, and I would just buy whatever I wanted to buy. So if you're going to do that, and you're going to cut up those credit cards, you need to be sure and close the accounts.
And if you cut the credit cards, you put half of them under the sink in the bathroom and half under the sink in the kitchen so they don't get divinely married and healed back together again. There's another philosophy that we'd like to introduce to you, and that's in the area of allowances. Whenever you, let me talk a bit about budgeting just for a second. For years I said, I don't want to live on a budget, and I resisted that. Anyone who said a budget, I said, I don't want to live on a budget. I said, I don't have enough money to budget. You have to have money to budget, and if all you have goes for bills, then why have a budget? You know what I was really saying? Underneath all of that, what I was really saying is I don't want to be accountable to anyone else for what I spend. That was really what was underneath. I wanted to be able to go spend whatever I wanted to spend. I didn't want anyone asking questions about what I spent. I wanted free latitude to do whatever I wanted. And so when we came into the whole budget thing, part of that thing is about going to your mother and asking permission, or going to your father and asking permission to be able to spend anything. So we came up with something that would really work well for us. It's not a new thought. It's getting allowances. And we still get an allowance. We get $50 each paycheck for an allowance, so we get $100 a month for an allowance. We started out $15 each paycheck, $30 a month many years ago, and this is money that we're not accountable to each other for. I remember Lori was taking a class one time, and it was on being a clown. And so she bought these awful clown shoes. I mean, awful. They were about that long, and she paid $100 for clown shoes. And I said, what are you doing? She said, what's it to you? It's my allowance. See, no accountability whatsoever. We can do whatever we want to with it. We can save it up. And then when I go into, my toy store, Radio Shack, or Sharper Image, then I can buy something without checking with Lori because I've saved up enough money.
Right. And with allowances, you don't have to be accountable to the other one. If I want to take that money and I want to save all of my $50 for a number of months and then go out and buy my husband something, or go out and buy the children to go out and buy the children something, or give my money away or donate it, I don't have to be accountable for that money. That's what we call play money. And I don't have to be accountable, nor are there any expectations on that money. And it provides some freedom, because everybody feels like they want to have a little freedom, especially when you're doing budgeting. It's important to feel like you've got some freedom.
And Lori can't say to me, if you really love me, you would spend that on me. See, if I go to buy her flowers, no. If I go to buy her flowers, it doesn't come out of that. If I'm buying her a birthday present, it doesn't come out of that. If I go buy groceries, it doesn't come out of that. Now, if we're out of money, and we know we're out of money in our budget to go out to eat, and I say, let's go out to eat, I'll spend my allowance. Well, then I've spent my allowance on going out to eat, and it was my choice, and I can't go back later and say, I want it back from general fund. If I've spent it, I've spent it, but I can choose to spend it on whatever I want to spend it on. It's not for gasoline for the car. It's not for buying coffee. It's not for taking my friends to lunch. It's no accountability whatsoever, and so it allows you to have some money. Now, Lori squirrels it away in this little box that she's got that I never know where it is. She moves it around on me so I can't find it. It's her money. And it's the only time ever in our household that we have a mine and yours. We don't do mine and yours, and I'll get more into that later, but we don't do mine and yours except our allowances, and it can get really funny after a while about what we spend them on and what we don't. But it's having a philosophy around that if you would like to introduce that into your budget. And then what is your philosophy around savings? Now, some of you have a savings account. You put money in it every month, and you take it out of it every month. It's a glorified checking account. You call it savings, but it never has any money in it. Savings account is to put money in and leave it, and that's why it's called savings. You save it for another time. I would recommend that if you can in your budget, in any way, even if you just start with 1%, it's build up until you're taking 10% of your income for tithe and 10% for yourself, and you're saving it. You save that 10% for a rainy day. And I said to somebody one time, a class I was teaching, said, how would you like to have 10% of everything you've ever made?
All of your life.
And afterwards, a man came up to me and he said, I'm that person. I have 10% of everything I ever made. And it was a premarital class. And this lady thought that was really awesome, and she married him. But come to find out, there was a reason why he had 10% of everything he ever made. He was a tightwad. I mean, that's how copper wire was invented. He got a hold of a penny with each hand and pulled. That's how tight he was. And ultimately, they didn't make it because he wouldn't spend on anything. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is to begin to have some thought toward the future. What is your thought for the future? Now, that doesn't mean that God won't provide for us, but we have to have some thought along the line for what's going to happen as we get older, what happens in emergencies. And our philosophy is we'll do whatever we can to make our future secure. If the stock market dies, it's kind of taking its last gasp, but if the stock market dies, then it dies, and we just lose it. But we did whatever we could, and then we trust God. Yes. Past that point, we'll do everything we can, and if it doesn't work out, then we trust God. But we believe that God requires us to go as far as we can go, and then we trust. I believe that God steps in at the limit of a man's capability, and he expects us to go to that limit, and then we kick in, and we trust. I suggest that you have an emergency fund. What happens if the clutch goes out on your car, or transmission goes out on your car, or your refrigerator quits, or your microwave quits, or your shoes wear through? What happens? That's an emergency. What happens when those things happen? For most of us, we do what? We get our credit card out and we go charge it. I'm suggesting that you might want to have a fund that you set aside money for those eventualities, and you save it all up and you say, man, I've got this nest egg, and you don't want to spend it when the emergency comes. But those times that Lori and I have looked at each other and say, aren't we thankful that God made provision, that we had it? So we don't get angry because it went away. We're just glad that we had it. And those are the times when we pray Malachi, and I will rebuke the devourer for my sake. We say, God, we'll do all of that, and then we'll ask you to rebuke the devourer. Now I suggest that because we like to travel, we have a little place where we put travel money. A vacation is a monthly expense. How many of you take a vacation of some kind if it's just go camping in the mountains? Yeah, most of you take a vacation. Do you wait until the last minute to come up with the money? A lot of times we do. Some of you don't, but a lot of times we do. We end up charging it, and then you spend the rest of your life paying for that vacation that you took. I suggest that you make it a monthly expense. And so if you're going to spend $2,000 next September, then you've got about 10 months, 11 months to make that happen. So you take $2,000, you divide it by 11, that's what it costs you per month for that vacation. And if you can't afford that, then you shouldn't go on the vacation. So set aside a travel vacation account. And then we have this little thing we call a getaway fund. We go away once a quarter, and I suggest that you do that as a married couple, that you go away once a quarter. It can just be across town. You know, they have specials in some of the nice hotels. It's a weekend special and get it really cheap. Maybe you do that. Maybe you go to the mountains. Maybe you go camping. Maybe you go to someplace exotic. But get away once per quarter where you don't talk about kids, you don't talk about money, and you don't talk about work, where you just go to get away and work on a relationship. And guess what? Christmas comes around about the same time every year. It's kind of around the 25th of December. Some of us look up about the 10th of December and say, it's Christmas time. What are we going to do? Now, I remember the good old days back when the banking system wasn't so good, and you charged on Christmas Eve, and it didn't hit the bank till the 1st when you got paid. Hits the bank way too fast now. So you can't write the check and hope that it doesn't get to the bank on time. And so what I suggest you do, and we've done this for a number of years, and that's Christmas Club. You can create your own. Some credit unions have them. We have a credit union that has a Christmas Club. We put a certain amount of money in it every month. We're already putting in it, no, not yet. Starting this month, we're putting in it for next year. And sometime in the next few days, we will get a check, and it will be for the amount that we have put away this period of time, and we'll have that money to spend for Christmas. That's what our Christmas money will be. So we put it away all year, same amount every month. In November, they send us a check, and that's what we spend on Christmas. We spend no more, we spend no less. That's what we spend for Christmas.
That's right. Because it's important to understand, we try to budget in advance and just try to estimate what it will cost us to do Christmas in a very nice fashion for our family and for our friends. And so we'll estimate each month what we're going to put away. But it's important to remember that when you get that Christmas check in the mail, that you don't go out and spend twice as much of that or 3 times as much, and really try to remember what the real meaning is all about. And not get yourself in debt, because we know that there are a lot of people that happens to over the holiday season, and they get in debt, and then comes January. And I don't know if you know this, but January is the biggest month for depression and for suicide. And it really makes some sense, and why that happens is because people just get overwhelmed by everything that they did, the hopelessness of never being able to pay all of that money back and never really having a nice holiday season. But be real frugal in that area, and just remember what the season is really truly all about.
And can I make a suggestion? Never charge a gift. Never charge a gift. If you charge a gift, you've lost the meaning of what gifts were all about. Because now you're putting yourself into the hardship of having to pay it back. And gifts are about giving of your heart to someone else, not to put you in a jam, not to put you in a financial bind. If you have to make a gift, make a gift. If you have to make a card, make a card. Right. But I would like to suggest to you that never do you charge a gift, whether it's a wedding gift, an anniversary gift, a birthday gift, or a Christmas gift. Also, so not only Christmas is a monthly expense, but all the other gifts that you buy, that's a monthly expense as well. Because you have birthdays, you have anniversaries, you have babies that are born. You've got all of those other events that go on that you know you're going to spend for every month. And so budgeting, it isn't just those big things. Some people just put the rent down or their house payment, they put their car payment down, they put the utilities down, they put a few things down and they're done. That's their budget. I have all this money left. No, everything goes in the budget. Your newspaper goes in the budget. Your magazines go in the budget. Your eating out, your entertainment, everything goes in the budget. In fact, when we first started on a budget, I'm going to give you a principle later, and that's to take a Kleenex box and to put it somewhere in your house or some kind of a box, and for 1 month take every expense that you have, jot it down on a piece of paper and put it in the box. If you buy a 25-cent gumball, write it down, put it in the box. If you put money in the parking meter, write it down, put it in the box. No matter what you spend, and don't change your spending habits. Write everything down and put it in a box. And at the end of the month, take those things out of the box and categorize them. Put them all down to see where your money's been so you can decide where you're going to send it. Now, early on in our relationship, our money was disappearing really fast. We had some money in savings, and you know, these ATM machines are awesome, and they had just invented them then. Our kids thought they were wonderful. You go put plastic in, you get money back. And they thought this was a machine that it never ended, and we said we were out of money. Well, just go to that machine, put that thing in there, out comes the money. They thought it was a never-ending supply. Some kids think writing checks, just write a check. Some of you think that. There's a never-ending supply. And so you take that and then you decide what you're going to spend. We couldn't believe it. We were spending an incredible amount of money on eating out and an incredible amount of money on food that we brought into the house. I think it was almost $1,000 a month on what we paid for groceries and what we paid for eating out. No wonder we were living off of our savings. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't know how bad it is. In fact, I worked with a couple, it was a lady one time who was a nurse, and I did a budget for her, and she had $25 a month left. That's it. When I wrote down all of her expenses, and she said, I knew it would be bad, but I had no idea it'd be this bad. Because she'd go down one side of the street paying and come up the other side apologizing. And the next month she'd go down this side paying and come back up apologizing. She wasn't really in touch with what it was costing her to live. And so I suggest that you determine where you've been and then decide where you're going to go. What have you spent for gifts? That's going to be a monthly expense. What did you spend for Christmas last year? That's going to be a monthly expense, and so forth. Benevolence, obviously, we believe in tithing, giving to God what is His. And the 10% comes off of the top. Somebody said, do you tithe on your gross or do you tithe on your net? Well, it depends. Somebody told me one time if you want a gross blessing or a net blessing. So I don't know. I'm not going to try to be theological and interpret that to you. That's something you have to decide between you and God. But I had an interesting thing happen to me one time. I applied for a job at a bank as a loan officer. The president of the bank knew that I attended a local church, and he knew that I was active in the church, and he said, what would happen if you knew that someone from your church was paying their tithe and they were behind on their pickup payment? Would you go tell them not to pay their tithe and to pay their pickup payment? Would you repossess their pickup payment? What would you do? It was an interesting question that I had to ponder for a long time. And it's hard to think those things through. But we know, Lori and I have adopted absolutely 100%. Well, when you plant that seed in the ground, God is faithful to give it back to you. And then your offerings are above that, and then we feel bad if we're not finding other people to help. You know, every person you help, you put seed in the ground. Yes. And you can't have a harvest if there's not seed in the ground. And so we look for opportunities. I would suggest you do that. God does give back to you. Then there's something called budget billing. Have you heard of that? Budget billing is where they take your bills for your utilities for the last 12 months, and they divide them by 12. Now they're doing it by quarter. And they set your amount for 3 months now. We used to have the same amount for 12 months, but they set it for 3 months. And if you go above or below, it doesn't matter. And then they settle up with you, set a new amount and go on, settle up, set a new amount and go on. And so that you have a budget figure. So that when it gets really cold and you get a spike month, you don't have to pay that much. You've already averaged it out, and you pay the same amount each month and then settle up or down at the end of the quarter. It's a very good way to do that. And I already talked to you about the Kleenex box. So I have a question for you. Who makes the spending decisions at your house? Both of you. What did I hear? Both of you? What about all the rest of you? They spoke up quick. You go like this? It's interesting, and sometimes someone will say they do because that's the party line. And we've conspired to put up front on who is going to make the decisions. The reality is no one should make the spending decisions by themselves. The spending decisions are made jointly. We used to have money meetings every Sunday night. I hated those money meetings. I hated to talk about money. Lori talked about money easy. I was defensive around money. I didn't want to talk about money. I didn't want to explain what I wanted to do, why I wanted to do. I didn't want to fight about it. Couldn't we just live in peace? In fact, one of the best stories I've got is, this wasn't allowance. I kind of opened my mouth and put my foot in it. My brother bought a canoe, and it was an okay canoe. And he said, I liked it. I thought that's a great canoe. And he said, if I you know, I don't know for sure that I'll keep it, but if I ever decide to sell this canoe, would you be interested? Do you want first crack at it? And I said, if you sell it, I'll buy it. I didn't say anything to Lori. I didn't ask Lori what she thought. I was back in one of those kind of single in a relationship. And sure enough, he decided not to keep it. And I had already told him I'd give him $100 for it. And that was a whole lot of money in those days. A whole lot of money these days. So I bought the canoe. I heard about that canoe. I heard about that canoe. Every time we went out in that canoe, I heard about that canoe. Now, let me show you how things can go. You know, Lori will have the mic here. She can respond, too. So I bought this canoe, and I caught heck for buying this canoe and not asking her. And then one day, she got this new job for a large corporation, and she went down and charged $700 worth of clothes and didn't ask me. Now, I'm trying to figure out, you know, I buy a $100 canoe, and I get in trouble. And she buys $700 worth of clothes, but that's okay because it's business. And when it's business, that's okay. So how do you make canoe a business? This is my business canoe. I rent it out. But see how those things can come up? And when we finally worked it out, you know, I was so tired of that canoe by then, I sold it for $65. I took a $35 loss on that canoe just to get rid of it. I haven't bought a canoe since. I'm only now, you know, umpteen years later, kind of safe enough to think about buying another canoe. But that's what you get into, is how do we resolve these differences? How do we resolve the canoe? How do we resolve the clothes? How do we come together so that we have some kind of a sense that will allow us to live in harmony around how we make money decisions? Because you can fight about money almost more than anything else. See, if I find money issues, I'll find trust problems. Because money is about trust. If you handle your money easily between you, you trust each other. If there's a problem, there's a trust problem that's present there. And rather than sweeping that under the rug and dividing your money, it's better to go deal with the trust problems. If I find a sexual issue, there's an intimacy problem. If I find a money problem, there's a trust problem, almost always. So who makes the spending decisions? Both of you. Now, here's the process. See, the fight occurs when you write the budget. Lori can't sit down and write the budget and give it to me for my approval. I can't sit down and write the budget and give it to her for her approval. You write it together. You sit down and you make the spending decisions together. So, you know, for years I've always thought I'd like to have one of those party barges. You know what those look like? Pontoon boats that go out on the lake. They have a little barbecue grill on them, and you can go out and swim off the side. And I always thought that would be great. And so if I came to Lori and said, you know, I'd really like to have a party barge, she might ask me why I'm suddenly into the party barge business, or, you know, why I want to have one when we never go to the lake anyways. She's way too practical like that. But when that was done, if I said, you know, I really want one of those, she would say, okay, let's see what we can do in the budget. Now, we might set aside $50 a month for the rest of my life, and in 2052, I might get a party barge. But the budget drives the train. Right. See, we sit down and decide in the budget what you're going to do. That drives the train of what you're going to spend. It's not what one wants or the other one wants. It's not about the yes or the no's. The person who writes the checks is simply a clerk. That's a clerical piece. That's someone who enjoys or is better at detail than the other one. Lori does that because it makes her feel safer. She can see where everything's at. I use a debit card. And so I go and use a debit card. I write debit card right across the top of the receipt, and I give it to Lori most of the time. 99% of the time, I remember to give it to her. And then she writes it in the check register, and I can see then what she spends. She can see what I spend, and we can talk back and forth about those issues. But she's the one that likes to write the checks. That's great for me. But the spending decisions are made together. It's not her job to make the spending decision. It's not my job to make the spending decision. So what does a budget document look like? And I don't know if you can see that very well. But what that's pointing to, I'm just going to walk over here. What that's pointing to on this document, this shows how a budget might look. And a budget is, we've taken his income and her income, and we have 4 columns here. These 4 columns are for 4 weeks. And so I'm just pointing to the fact that in this situation, we're showing one person's income where they get paid monthly. So there's a large amount there. So I'm showing, I think it's $5,000 there. And then the other spouse also works in this case, and they get paid weekly. So if we're preparing a budget document, we've got 4 columns for 4 weeks. The first one's going to have more, obviously, because that person is paid once a month. And we also have the weekly amount. And so now we're going to decide all of the spending. There's one other item here that says child support. And I want to talk about that just for a moment. What do you do if you're a blended family and you get child support? Whose money is it? See, if Lori had children from a previous marriage and she got child support, is it her money? No. To do with as she wants to? You know how many people believe it's her money? Oh, yeah. And I can do with whatever I want to do with it. That's my money. That's there for my kids. And so I've got 2 kids over here and she's got 3 kids over there. And my kids are living with me and she gets child support for, I'm paying child support. She gets child support. I can't do anything for my kids because I'm paying child support. She's got all this money to lavish on her kids. Is that right?
Goes into one account.
See, it's still part of the pot. And a lot of people would argue with me, but it still is. It's part of the pot. Everything comes together and drops down. Otherwise, I have access to money that she doesn't, or she has access to money that I don't. And that's not the way it works. Now, let me tell you about paying child support. I was going to cover that later, but I'll stop here while I'm on child support. We did something with our kids that was really fun because I paid child support for them when they were small, and then when they were older, when they cost a lot of money, they came to live with us.
Smart kids.
Lock, stock, and barrel, man. We bought the cars. We paid for all of that teenage stuff we got to pay for. But in those days, we paid child support, and it was a lot of money. It was $600 a month way back then, and that was a lot of money. That was almost as much as I made part of the time. And so our kids would say, you don't give Mom anything. They'd come and say, Mom said to buy us a coat. Mom said to buy us this. Mom said to buy us that. And we'd say, well, that's what we give your mom money for. And we like to buy things. I like to buy dresses for my daughter. I always have. I still do. I would love to take her shopping and buy things for her. That's something in a father's heart that I enjoy. But they would come asking for coats and shoes and various things. And they said, you don't give Mom anything. So we came up with this brainstorm. We went down to the bank, and we got 600 $1 bills. Kids were really small. And we brought them home, and we broke open all the bundles, and we scattered 600 $1 bills out on the floor. And they just got under and played with them. And then we'd already made the deal with the bank that it was going to be okay that we brought them back in a bushel basket. But we brought them all, put them into a great big grocery sack, and we all went to the bank together. And we set this sack up on the counter and said, we have 600 $1 bills in this sack. And we need you to write a check for $600 to their mom. And so they wrote a check with that name on it. We showed the kids. Here's your mom's name right here on this check. And we all went to the mailbox together, and we put it in the mailbox, and we mailed it together. We never heard another word after that from then on because they understood how much money was actually going into that other household for them. And I don't know, we don't have too many original thoughts, but that happened to be one of them. And it worked out really well. So when child support comes in, when it hits the budget, it hits right with all of the rest of the income. And so now we have this much income. And so by having that much income, now we come to the areas that are real critical around. These are the savings. This is the tithe. This is the vacation. This is the Christmas club. These are all of those saving documents that I just talked about that come here. And then we start listing expenses, and everything gets listed there. Your beauty supplies, getting your hair cut, having repair on your car, insurance on your car payment, all of the things that everything you can possibly think of that comes out of that Kleenex box that said you spent it the month before. And you list everything there. And then what happens, once we get into the expenses, then what happens is we've listed the income each one of the 4 weeks of a month. We've taken all the expenses out. And if you'll notice what we did, we kind of moved them back and forth across the expenses. So they didn't all come out of here. We had some come out here. We had some come out here. Groceries came out one place. Gasoline came out another. Moved them back and forth. So when we took the income and subtracted all the items from them, then what we had is the amounts that go across the bottom of the budget, and we try to make them as close to the same as possible every week. So we have to move things around in order for that to happen. But that way we have $50 a week left to spend. Now, what we used to do is, we don't have to do that anymore necessarily, but what we used to do was our week didn't start on Monday. No, our week didn't start on Friday, it started on Monday. Because if you start on Friday, you spend all your money over the weekend and you have nothing left for the rest of the week. So you start your week on Monday. If you have any money left, you have the weekend. Otherwise, if you spend it all, then next week you have expenses, and you have no money to pay the expenses with, and out comes the credit card. And that's where you begin to blow it at that point. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But establish a budget document. It's very important that you do that. And so then out of the budget comes something that looks like this. We begin to talk about percentages. 25 to 40% of your budget should go for housing. These are just kind of guidelines that the experts in this field will give you. 20 to 35% of your budget will go to food and household kinds of costs. 7 to 13% will go for a car. Now, if possible, don't have a car payment. If there's any way you can save up and buy a car, save up and buy a car. It may be less car than what you want, but it's so great to have one that's paid for. 7%, no more than 7% for consumer debt. That's paying off credit cards. 6 to 10% for insurance. 6 to 9% for entertainment, recreation, and vacations. 5 to 7% for clothes, 5 to 10% for savings, 3 to 4% for gifts and Christmas, 2 to 4% for allowances, 2 to 8% for furniture, 2 to 5% for education, and 5% for contingencies. So you can kind of see this here, but notice the first figure adds up to 86%. The second one adds up to 167%. So you can't use these percentages all the way down the line. You've got to move them back and forth so that it comes to 100%. But everything has to be budgeted. Clothes have to be budgeted. Anything that you buy has to be budgeted. If you're having lawn service done to your house, that has to be budgeted. Things don't just magically appear at your house. You have to budget for them and determine how much money is going to go there. So how many impulse buyers do we have? I'm one. You know, I go into a store and, man, I want it right now. And I pick it up. You know, I see this great little toy and I pick it up. You know how I keep from paying for it? I don't steal it. You know how I keep from paying for it? I walk around with it. I walk around with it until I come to my senses.
And the longer I can keep him in the store, the more likely we are not to buy the item.
But I walk and I walk and I walk, and then I'm every stalker, every person who does stalking in the store. I'm their nightmare because the moment I'm released from it, I lay it down. No matter what section I'm in, I don't take it back to the section where I got it. I lay it down right there, even if I'm in the checkout stand, because I know that I'm an impulse buyer. And as an impulse buyer, I have to put safeguards in place. We have a philosophy. Lori wouldn't do this necessarily. I would. So we have a safeguard that we've agreed on. It makes her feel safe. And that is, we never buy the same day we're presented to. You ever gone to a timeshare presentation? Oh, those guys hate us. The manager always comes, you know, the big guns that's going to sell it to us. Because we tell them when we sit down, we're not going to buy today. We're not going to buy today because we have a rule that we don't buy the same day we're presented to. And it's, yeah, that'll be okay. And when we get to the end, we smile and say, we're not going to buy today. We'll think about it overnight. If we still want it, we'll call you tomorrow. Well, you can't buy it tomorrow. Well, then, if we can't buy it tomorrow, we don't want it. But we'll give you $1,000 off today if you'll buy it. Well, if it's any good, you'll give me $1,000 tomorrow. And if you won't, then I don't want it. We're not going to buy it. When the vacuum sweeper guy comes, you ever had a vacuum sweeper thing done? Oh, man, they find dirt in your carpet. I mean, we vacuum ahead of time. And they bring their thing in, and they got this little filter on there, and they get all kinds of dirt out of your carpet. And you think, that's a good vacuum. I should buy that. And they make you think that you should buy it. In fact, they make you think you're offending them if you don't buy it. Nothing against salespeople, but that's how we have stopped that ability, is we never buy the same day that we're presented to. We don't buy a car the same day we're presented to. We don't buy things on the same day because I would buy it. I think it's awesome. And then you have buyer's remorse. Yes. It's called cognitive dissonance. You know why you have a reception line when you get married? It's because when 400 people walk by and say, congratulations, you did a good thing, you did a good thing.
You think you did a good thing.
And after 400 people tell you that, then you start beginning to feel like maybe I did do a good thing after all. So if you're an impulse buyer, manage it with some system in place. We try to teach our son that, to think about it overnight. If you still want it tomorrow, then go buy it. We went, when our daughter was tiny, we went to a store, and she had a little bit of money, but she didn't have enough. I think she was $2 short from buying some little doll or something she wanted. And she said, can I borrow $2? And we said, you can work it off when we get home. So we gave her the $2 or whatever it was, and when she came home, we told her she had to scrub the inside of the tub and the shower wall. And she'd go in and work for a little bit, and she'd come out and she'd say, sure wish I hadn't have bought that dumb thing. And then she'd go back in and scrub and scrub and come, I sure wish I hadn't have bought that dumb thing. And how many times have you done that?
I sure wish I hadn't.
I have things I haven't even touched that just somehow there was pleasure in ownership. But there's no pleasure anymore. It's in the way. And so that you don't have to wish you hadn't have bought that dumb thing, put something in place to handle impulse buying. Child support I've talked about. We had two models of budgeting to really look at. One model was my parents. And my parents really made no provision. You know, the Lord was always going to come. California was going to fall off in the ocean, and that's where you made sure your debts were, and when it fell off, you wouldn't have to pay them. I'm serious. You think I had... That's how I was raised. And if you could leave one town and go to the next, they couldn't find you in those days. Computers weren't that great. That's kind of how I grew up. And so they made no provision, and they lived okay in their older age. They were in an apartment where Social Security paid. They took half their Social Security for it. But it was small, and it was cramped, and life was hard for my parents until they died. Lori's parents is our other model. And they took steps to provide for retirement. They have a home that's paid for. They trade cars every few years. They're not wealthy, but they took steps to prepare. They can take a trip if they want to. They can enjoy life. My father-in-law retired when he was 58, but we had two models to look at. I came out of a model that was dysfunctional. Lori came out of a model that was very well modeled for her. And I had to make a decision which one of these I was going to model to. My parents would bounce a check, and that was okay. It was kind of a way of life. And that's not how Lori's parents were. And so I had to really say, which one of these two models do I want to follow? And if you don't have good modeling, find someone who can give you good modeling. So I want to give you 10 commandments of budgeting. This this will help you. The first one is, you shall not live above your means. Now, whenever I help people with budgeting, when they come in, they don't have enough money. You know, if I were to take you, and if I would have had time tonight, I would have put a whiteboard up here, and I would have had you tell me how much it costs to live. And I guarantee you by the time we got finished and we had some hypothetical income, we would have had more expenses than income. I've done it many, many times. And so I have people come in, and they don't have enough money to pay their bills. And so I say to them, do you have cable television? Yes. You can't afford it. Turn it off. I can't. Yes, you can. Well, you can't even get TV. Yes, you can. We don't have cable. Put rabbit ears up, and you can get some channels. It's all you need. In fact, TV eats up too much of our time anyway. And then I say, do you have that call package on your phone? You know, that call forwarding and waiting and all the costs? Yeah, well, I got, you know, if I'm on that. No, you can't afford it. Turn it off. What kind of car do you have? Do you have a car payment? Yes, sell it. If you can get any money out of it, sell it and buy one that has a cheaper payment, or get enough out of it that you can pay cash for something that may not look good, but that you can afford. Well, I live in this apartment that you can't afford that apartment. You can afford $1,200 a month. You got to go find one that's $800. Well, I can't. Yes, you can. We have this thing about living above our means, and then our pride gets in the way. We can't go backwards. And that will kill us faster than anything else. Because the debt that flows through is almost impossible to recover from sometimes. Bankruptcies are at an all-time high just because people get over their heads and they can't figure out how to get out. Number 2, you shall give of your abundance to God. And that's a principle we all agree on. Number 3, you shall save a portion of your income, because if you don't save, you're eating the seed. If you don't save in the hard times, you don't have anything to live off of. When the crisis hits, you don't have anything. You're spending everything you get. And there has to be a place to save. Number 4, you shall begin plans for retirement in your youth. Begin those plans now. Some of you may not. You're not youth, but start now. Some kind of plan that says we've got to do something, however small, toward our future. Number 5, you shall share all financial burdens, successes, and planning with your spouse. You talk about money. You talk about when there's enough, when there isn't enough. You talk about when it's short. You talk about where you're going to go on vacation. Can you afford it? Can't you afford it? You talk about what you can do and what you can't do, what you can afford to do. And one of the dangers is somebody will say the other one can do it whether you can afford it or not. That was who I used to be. If Lori wanted it, she could have it. And then I'd figure out how to make it happen. And that's not the way to go. If we can't afford it, I should say, I'm sorry, we can't afford that. We can afford something else. But in good fiscal integrity, we can't afford that. Number 6, you shall not make idols of money and material possessions. When they begin to be everything, then you have to ask, have I given God title? If God were to require it, could I just lock the door to the house and walk away? Could I do that? If you could do that, then you've given God title. If you couldn't do that, you still hold title. Doesn't mean God's going to take it away from you. It means you give God title, and if He requires it for some reason, you'll give it to Him. Number 7, you shall not be buried by excessive debt. Debt will kill you. I can't emphasize that too much. Debt will kill you. You know how we managed this in the early days? Because if you were to take a trip and it cost you $2,000, you get home and you've put it on Visa. Then you say, well, I can only afford 1,000. I can only afford to pay off 1,000, and you just keep the other 1,000 on, and now you're $1,000 in debt. So because I was coming out of that impulse buying thing, I said to Lori, and this was part of her security, I said to her, I'm going to go get an American Express card. What do you think? Because American Express, you have to pay it at the end of the month. They don't care much about how much you charge. I have no idea. I've charged a whole lot before. And I don't think they care as long as you pay it at the end of the month. There are no limits. I mean, obviously there are some limits, but I don't know what they are. I've never hit it. But at the end of the month, whether you have the money or not, you have to pay. Now, they have a different credit card, but I don't want that one. I want that American Express that at the end of the month, you have to pay. Then, no matter what we spent, we don't have any options. We don't have to do that anymore because we've developed a discipline over the years. Now we use the United Plus where we get the miles and pay it off each month. But even if we needed the discipline again, we would default right back to our American Express. Use that so we have to make the payment. Right. Number 8, you shall not fall into the trap of labeling resources and possessions yours and mine. Nothing is Lori's and nothing is mine except allowances, of course. But it's not her car and my car. It's not her money and my money. And when you talk about allowances, what do you do when one makes more money than the other? There are times in our marriage that Lori has made more money than I have, times I've made more money than she has. And so in the very beginning, she was making more than I was, and she wanted more allowance than I got. And we had to say no. And so over the years, as our income has shifted back and forth, we haven't had that issue because we both get the same amount always. One doesn't get to choose more in the power structure because they make more money than the other. One doesn't, just because I make more money or she makes more money, we don't have the power, if we make the most money, to decide how we spend our money. It's our money together. It's our car together. It's our house together. It's our savings together. It's our everything together. We don't have identities. It's not hers and mine. And the thing that amazes me is the guy that comes along and says, I bought my wife a car. And they're both making payments on it. It's like buying your mom a football for Christmas, you know. Number 9, you shall allow resources for entertainment and vacations. You can't budget right to the limit because you will crack. One day you'll get the credit card out and you'll go on a spending spree. You will do that. Number 10, you shall direct and control your money rather than letting your money direct and control you. You get out in front of it and tell it where to go rather than just simply keeping track of where you've been. Some warning signals of credit problems. This is when you know you're in trouble, right here. The bells should go ringing on you. The first one is receiving calls or notices from creditors demanding payment. If you're getting those calls, you're in trouble already. Paying only the minimum constantly on credit balances. You know how long it takes to pay if you're paying only the minimum? There's some studies done. I don't even think you can do it in your lifetime. I think you die before you get it paid if you pay only the minimum. Using credit to pay for other credit purchases. Man, we consolidate it. Now we have all this money, so we can go charge some more. See, here's what happens. I had a couple one time that came in to see me, and they were in trouble credit, really big trouble. But she had a car wreck and got a settlement on the car wreck. And they gave her a bunch of money, and they paid their way out of debt. But they didn't learn anything. So they got right back in the same way because they didn't change their habits. And then they paid themselves out $5 at a time and had to work at it, and they changed everything at that time. So when you consolidate, it looks like you have a lot of money, and you can just go spend again. Consolidation does nothing for you other than maybe takes your irresponsibility, puts it in one place, but if you're not careful, you haven't learned anything. And you'll just need to consolidate again. And then you'll need to consolidate again, and the next time it's bankruptcy. Using credit to buy basic necessities. You don't charge groceries. You don't charge clothes. Are you hearing me? You don't charge. Some of you are wanting to kind of screen that out. You don't charge necessities. Spending more than 20% of net income on credit purchases. If you've got 20% of your income going on credit cards, you're in trouble. Unable to say exactly how much is owed on installment loans or long-term debt. If you don't know how much you owe, you're already in trouble. Or postponing payments until next month due to lack of funds. I just can't make the payment this month. You're in trouble. And it's time to get your arms around what's going on. So how do you pay yourself out of debt? It goes something like this. Let's say that you owe $2,000 on one account, you owe $1,000 on another, you owe $500 on another, you owe $300 on another. And so a lot of people think you go to the biggest one and pay it off first. No, you go to the smallest one and pay it off first. And so the one you're paying $25 a month on, you pay that off. And then you don't have $25 more to spend elsewhere. Now you take the $50 plus the $25 you were paying, and now you pay $75 a month till that one's paid for. And then you can't have a party because you got $75 more a month, because now you link them all up, and you pay $150 a month toward that $1,000 bill until it's paid for, and now you're paying $250 a month toward the $2,000 bill until it's paid for, and this is the only effective way to get out of debt. You don't have extra. You keep accumulating all the way across until it's paid for. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you borrowed $80 a month for 5 years. You're living $80 a month over your income, and a lot of people do a whole lot more than that. But let's just say that you don't pay it back, you don't make any payments, you just take $80 a month for 5 years at an interest rate of 18%. That's not where we are now, but a lot of credit cards are still hovering up there. And so you get an amortization schedule, if you can see this. Every year you go $960 more in debt until finally you owe $4,800. You've got interest racking up on that, and so your total debt is $8,104 after 5 years. And now you start making payments. Your payments are $203 a month, and the total that you pay back is $12,190 for $4,800. Isn't that amazing? And now look what happens. You used to live $80 over your budget, but now you don't have that 80 anymore, plus you're making a $203 payment. So your effective standard of living just went down $283 a month over living $80 above your budget every month. It's not unheard of to have $4,800 in debt in a 5-year period. In fact, that would be conservative by many people's standards. But isn't that amazing that now for 5 years of having $80 a month more, the next 5 years you pay $283 a month in order to get out of that. So what do you do when you own your own business? What you do when you own your own business, you figure out how much money you're going to make in your business, some estimate of what you're going to make. And you divide it by the number of months and be reasonable about what it looks like. When I was in full-time counseling practice, I figured out what I was going to make every month. And I just took an average of what I knew I could produce every month. Now, the first month had a really good month. And the second month I had a good month. The third month it snowed a lot. Well, what do I do? Spend all of this? No. I write myself a check, the same amount every month. If there's a surplus, it goes into a separate account somewhere. When there's a surplus, it goes into a separate account somewhere. When there's a shortfall, you take out of the surplus, you make up the difference so that you're getting a check every month. When I was in private practice, I wrote a check into our household account from my business, the same amount every month, just like I was getting a check from an employer. Never higher, never lower. If we got too much in there, if we got a surplus in there, then we took a vacation or I got a raise. But never to the point where it put us in danger of not being able to fund it. Then if we needed to take a vacation, we took out of the surplus, and we still had the same amount of money. When it came Christmas and holiday time, we took out of the surplus so that we could have the same amount of money every month. Am I making sense? And if you don't do that, otherwise you have feast, and how are we going to pay the bills? And you get in a hole here, and then you have a slight month, and then you get here and you say, man, I can finally breathe again. But then you're right back in a hole again when something happens. It's that ability to plan every month what you're going to get. It's really critical if you have your own business to do that. So a summary that I would give you would say, learn to live on a budget. If you don't, examine why you're not willing to. Hold your money in one account. Don't scatter it. It's not yours and mine. Write the budget together. Have a family philosophy regarding credit, so that everybody knows what the family philosophy is. Have regular meetings where you talk about money. Have regular meetings where you talk about money. We're all a bunch of chickens when it comes to money. But have regular meetings so that you come together in a common philosophy. I'm going to close by telling you this one thing. Let me tell you how quickly you can put labels on each other if you're not careful. And I may have told this story in another session, I don't remember, but see, I was more irresponsible early in our relationship. And so Lori was much more responsible financially than I was. But as we came through, I got more responsible. See, and if you're not careful, you'll put a label on the other person that they're not going to be able to let go of. And so as we came through, I got more responsible, and I was had higher integrity with money. But way back there, Lori put she put a label on me that said I was fiscally irresponsible. I put a label on her that said she was a controller. So we both had labels on each other. We'll talk about the controller next time. But we had labels on each other. And as we came through, one day we got some extra money, and I said, let's use it for something, and I'm going to put it in an account. She said, will it still be there when we get there? Will the money still be there when we get there? That was 15 years later, when year after year after year I had demonstrated solid fiscal integrity. In fact, in some ways, I may be more conservative than Lori is now. But but the box was still there. If you're not careful, you'll put labels on each other. I put the controlling label on her, and even some days now, if she says something about telling me how to drive or something, I'll say, there's that firstborn controller going again. You see how powerful those labels are. She's not a controller. She gave that up long ago. I have to let her out of the box. You have to let the other person out of the box. There are trust issues that you have to let go of when they pertain to money. And so how you handle money will predict trust and power issues in your relationship. May God help you to manage this precious resource that He's given you and keep you from killing each other.
I think it's important to just to encourage each one of you in terms of being able to forgive one another. If there have been money issues in your relationship, it was very, very important that my husband forgave me for how I was controlling, and I was forgiving him on how what I thought he was spendthrift and not taking care of me. So it's very, very important when you're starting a new chapter in your budgeting and finance to be able to forgive each other. And secondly, and most importantly, and that is to ask God to forgive us for mismanaging what He has given us. And He has given us, He is truly our provision, and He has given us what we've either done well with or what we've either flaunted away. And so I think it's important that we ask Him to forgive us as we start in this new way of budgeting and managing our finances.
God will never give us more than what we manage effectively. The Bible says if we're faithful over the little things, He'll make us ruler over many. And if we're faithful around how we handle our money, God then can trust us with more. And sometimes when we don't have enough, it's not always the case. You can't beat yourself up. But if we haven't been good stewards, why would God want to give us more when we haven't learned how to manage what He's given us? Mm-hmm. And so it's something that I think we all have to just put the mirror in front of us and say, God, what are you saying to us around this important area of budgeting and finance?
It's very, very exciting. In the last number of months, and the first time in our lives, Pastor Larry and I are giving more money away than we're paying bills. And that's very, very exciting. And when you can get to that point, I mean, that's really what God wants us to do. He wants us to be putting that money, to be sowing seed back into His kingdom and for His glory. And I'll tell you what, that's a grand feeling, and all of you can be there.
When you plant seed in the ground, there's harvest time coming. Let's pray, shall we? Mm-hmm. Father, thank you for this time we spent together around money, around finances, around this precious commodity that you have given us to take care of for you. Father, help us not to take what you've given us and just bury it in the sand, but that we use it, we plant it, we bring forth a harvest with it, yes, that we value it, that we handle it carefully. And Father, that you would give us the maturity, the spiritual maturity, to be able to talk about it and to be able to work out our differences, Lord, around how we spend and how we handle this thing that can so quickly turn into power and trust, fracturing in our relationships. Father, give us your wisdom to know how to handle money, to know how to prepare ourselves to utilize what you give us and to be faithful over the little things so that you can bless us on an even greater scale. Father, I pray that you would touch each marriage, you would touch each person, you would touch each single person as they're learning the issues of finance and how to bring wisdom into a relationship. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
God bless you.
God bless you.